There is a famous anecdote back in the 2000s. The then US President George W. Bush was told by his national security folks about the coming China problem. That there was a country which had a huge population, it had the economy and the military which could one day surpass the United States. The dilemma before the US was, how does one counterbalance China? So the story goes that Bush took a globe on his lap in his Oval Office, rotated the globe and stuck his thumb when it arrived at China. And then he looked around the globe and said, the only country that is big enough and can stop China is India. On Crux Decode, 20 years after Bush's famous lines, how the relationship between India and China has evolved from cooperation to rivalry to what is being famously called strategic patience. And it's best exemplified by the recent comments of India's Foreign Minister, Dr. Subramaniam JAISHANKAR. While speaking on June 3rd at the GlobeSec 2022 forum in Bratislava, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. JAISHANKAR came down heavily on Europe. Dr. JAISHANKAR refuted the criticism against India's purchase of Russian oil. He clarified that India's purchase of Russian oil before the war began was less than 1%. Earlier, while in Washington, he had famously said that Europe buys more oil from Russia in one afternoon than India buys in an entire month.
We do buy some energy which is necessary for our energy security, but I suspect, looking at the figures, probably our total purchases for the month would be less than what Europe does in an afternoon. So you might want to think about it.
The moot point of Dr. JAISHANKAR's comments, other than pointing out the apparent European hypocrisy when it comes to buying Russian oil, was also to show that India is perfectly capable of making its own choices. That India was capable of managing its foreign policy on its own, refusing to act according to any pressures imposed on it. JAISHANKAR argued basically that the world cannot be Eurocentric as it was in the past. Soon his words became ragingly popular in an unexpected country. In China, netizens were lapping up the comments of the Indian Foreign Minister. Over the years, from his time there as ambassador, JAISHANKAR has managed to gain a fair bit of fan following on Chinese social media, Weibo. And here's why. JAISHANKAR was indignant for a good reason. For all its talk from the United States as well as Europe about treating India as an equal partner, the fact is that some are viewing India as being used by the West to further its own agenda in the Indo-Pacific. It's the US and its allies who need India and who want India to act as a counterbalance to China. India's slightly differing position on the Ukraine-Russia conflict was criticized by none less than US President Joe Biden. There is a feeling that India's nuanced position on Russia-Ukraine has not been appreciated enough in Western capitals. JAISHANKAR's comments were a reflection of India's stand on the Ukraine crisis. In the first place, India is reluctant to take sides between Russia and Ukraine. Instead, it wants to maintain economic as well as military ties with Russia, while at the same time, it tries not to anger Europe. However, as the United States and Europe have placed increasing pressures on India, which has annoyed the Modi government, has used many an occasion in the recent past to voice India's opposition to this kind of pressure. Second, these remarks emphasized India's strategic autonomy, basically underscoring that New Delhi is a lackey of no one but seeks to be an independent power. The comments also reflect India's objections to Europe's centralism, conveying that the center of the world is no longer in Europe. Meanwhile, against the backdrop of the current Russia-Ukraine conflict, India's international status has been significantly enhanced by various parties. JAISHANKAR's remarks also reflect the expansion of India's great power ambitions. It boils down to this: the West views the conflict with Russia as a generational one. It's not just a question of law and order or sovereignty or the use of force. It has been posited clearly as one between right and wrong. So in the narrow view of the United States and European partners, Russia is the aggressor and Ukraine is the victim. And in this narrative, any third country that is seen as taking a slightly nuanced position is viewed with suspicion, or worse, it is consigned as backing the evils unleashed by Vladimir Putin. Now, when India was told off for its moral ambiguity, Jaishankar fought back with down-to-earth pragmatism. He rightly turned the India versus Europe argument into a classic North versus South one. By speaking out on behalf of the more economically vulnerable developing countries, Jaishankar has groomed India as a champion of the global South, which underwrote the free flow of affordable oil as well as wheat, both of which Ukraine and Russia export in a great deal.
It is creating a huge fuel crisis, a food crisis, a fertilizer crisis, pushing inflation in low-income societies which don't have the margins really to absorb that. And so it can very quickly become political.
India's plain pragmatism has contrasted rather sharply with some of the high-sounding but empty rhetoric from the West. The West's hypocrisy was even more evident when China was concerned. In that GlobeSec forum in Bratislava, the interviewer tried to push India hard to view the Ukraine crisis through the prism of the China-India border dispute. However, Jaishankar went so far as to complain that Europe must grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems. But the world's problems are not Europe's problems. Here he showed a great sense of confidence that the China-India dispute not only predated the Ukraine crisis, but also had been better managed than the Russia-Ukraine crisis.
A linkage between China and India and what's happening in Ukraine. So come on guys, I mean, China and India happened way before anything happened in Ukraine. So the Chinese don't need a precedent somewhere else in the world on how to, engage us or not engage us, or be difficult with us or not be difficult with us. So as I said, I just see this as frankly a not very clever argument, a very self-serving one.
So it was Europe that should be given a lecture on crisis management and not the other way around. But Jaishankar has also used various fora from time to time to send out a clear message on India's dispute with China. Since he took office, Jaishankar has taken a relatively tough stand on China-related topics. He's even tried to take advantage of international forces to try and pressure China in order to realize the goal of making China concede the territory that it has encroached upon. But with the emergence of geopolitical disputes in the West, particularly in Europe, India is slowly but surely realizing that the United States and Europe had not only failed to properly handle this particular geopolitical crisis between Russia and Ukraine, but perhaps were even reasons that triggered the war. India does not want a war or even a similar crisis in its neighborhood. Jaishankar's latest statements can be seen as India's attempt to try and signal its stand on China by hitting out at Europe. Since the Russia-Ukraine conflict began, what India has shown diplomatically is its careful calculation of its own national interests. India wants to maintain a relatively detached position on the matter, neither offending Russia nor displeasing the United States and Europe.